I brought my book, but I forgot that this isn't the reading today. So. Oh, wait. Hi guys, thanks for coming out. Thanks for inviting me to this great event. I think my publisher told me about it almost over a year ago. I thought it was just such a great idea. One, because I'm excited about any event where people are reading books, especially when large groups of people are reading books, and it's not just because I get to sell some books, but also just to meet people who read novels in a different context. Last week I was at a university in New York. It was so interesting just talking to history students about this book, because it's different from people, from writers or just usually pretentious writer people. People want to know about things like historical accuracy and even stuff about resistance and atrocity and so on. So it's great to be here and great to be around you. This is pretty informal because I'll be doing a reading later. So some things about the book and about Night Woman. The funny thing about Night Woman is it actually didn't start out as this book. It started out as another book, and it started out in the original book was set in 1837. Have you ever seen, have you ever seen a movie where even though there's a lead character, you fall in love with a supporting character? And I was wondering why wasn't the movie about this minor person? There used to be this movie that came out years ago called Devil in a Blue Dress. I don't know if you've seen it. And Devil in a Blue Dress kind of has Denzel Washington in it. But nobody remembers Denzel Washington. Everybody remembers when Don Cheadle shows up. Yeah, it's like the movie is, I would say, you know that movie, Adventures of Mouse, otherwise called Devil in a Blue Dress? What happens is Don Cheadle shows up and steals the show. So now nobody remembers that Denzel, and Denzel is a major actor. Nobody remembers that Denzel is in this movie. And Lilith is one of these characters. She actually started out being a minor character in a different book. And I actually still have that book. It's not very well written. But when she shows up one day in this book, and she's working in a bar, and somebody looks at her, because something happens, and Lilith acts as if she doesn't know what happened. And somebody looks at her and goes, I know about you. I know everything about you. And I thought, what if we just do like a chapter and just explore her life a little bit? Who is this woman? Why is she in this bar? What got her here? So I wrote this one chapter and I couldn't stop. This chapter turned into another chapter, and turned into another chapter, and 10 pages became 20 pages, and 20 pages became 100. And 100 became 200, and 200 became 500. And she just took over the book. And it's funny because, people always ask things like a writer's process. And actually the process for this book was one big long fight. I fought with her the whole book. For all sorts of reasons, some of which you may have questions about. The language was a big fight. And some of you may have questions about the actual language of the book. That she should take over. She wasn't even my favorite character in the book. She just showed up and wouldn't go. And I remember I was talking to some friends of mine, I'm like, I don't know what to do, she's just taking over the damn book. It's like, it's not her book, it's my book. And writers have that sometimes, where writers will fight with characters, and sometimes writers win, and that's usually not a good book. And sometimes characters win. And the thing is, when you're writing a character, and it certainly was the case with Lilith, sooner or later, characters become real people, and they start to do things you don't necessarily approve of. They start to sort of contradict or thwart the writer's expectations, and they just have this other life that you just weren't expecting. Half of the things that happen in this book, in fact, a good 2/3 of the things that happened in this book didn't happen, wasn't stuff I thought of. It's funny going back and reading like notes about this book when I planned it, and none of that is there because she just showed up and took over the whole thing. Other thing that was not my intention when the book started out, even the idea of the Night Woman, of these women who meet in secret, I'd gone through almost a couple hundred pages before that idea happened. So the Night Woman happened because I was having a lunch with a poet. Her name is Rashida Abubakar, and by all means check out her work. She's a poet from the Congo, and she fled the Congo when Lumumba was killed and Mobutu took over. And I was talking to her about these women, and she says, you know, West African society is matriarchal. The king is always the eldest sister's son. So if you're the king, your son doesn't become king. Your oldest sister's son becomes the next king. Which basically means the queen mother rules the country. And not just that, things like deciding when to plant, things like the major decisions in a community, quite a few West African city-states were done by the woman. So I had this idea, what if a bunch of slave women created this power center in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a slave estate, and nobody knew about it but them? And what would the consequences of that be? And that led to the Night Woman. And it's funny, one of the things people forget about the Night Woman is, with the exception of Homer, all these women are mixed race. So that's one other thing to deal with, that these women are all mixed. These women are all half white, half black, and they're all dealing with it in different ways. And it focuses on all sorts of things, from things that we're still dealing with, like shadism. There's a great documentary that, I don't think it was officially released, that came out last year, called Dark Girls, about the different levels of racism that exist even within black communities, about light-skinned blacks and dark-skinned blacks and middle blacks and who has good hair. Chris Rock has a good documentary on that that's actually called Good Hair. You know, what does that mean? And so on. Just and a lot of some of the attitudes that we're still dealing with some of the stuff that is covered in the book. There's still and this is just what we know, and there are probably more. There are 21 million people on the planet who are still in slavery. And that's just what we know. And if there are 21 million that we know of, there are probably even that same amount that we don't know about. So it's still something that's still happening. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book. The other reason I wanted to write this book is that we have this perception, and we still have it, that on slave plantations, house slaves had it better than field slaves. And even now, every now and then you'll hear people use house N-word as a sign that you're too uppity, you're too intelligent, you're too not stereotypical, whatever, any black person who falls on the other. And we still use it. But one of the things a lot of us don't realize is just how brutal it was. Slavery was brutal for everybody. But how it was when you're a house slave. One, you're working together with a bunch of people, usually women and some men, who, because of the nature of slavery, could never totally become close. So these women in Night Women are working close proximity, but they never quite become sisters. They can't. Because one, they're creating an atmosphere where they learn to not trust each other, where some of them are working against each other, where if the mistress is drinking soup and starts to cough, that slave is immediately hauled up to be whipped before they realize she just coughed, it wasn't poisoning. So there is all of that, and there's a whole different kind of brutality that went on with house slaves, and that's one of the things I wanted to sort of address when I wrote the book. But also, most of the great slave novels, whether it's Beloved or even Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is problematic, still was an important book, tend to focus a lot on American slavery. And slavery in the States, I saw you guys some of you saw it from 12 Years a Slave. Has anybody seen the whole film? You really should see it. It's a great film. But American slavery was very different in lots of ways. One, even in an American state like Virginia, which had probably the most slaves at one time, there were always a minority. There was a small part of the population. In Jamaica, slaves made up to 90%, if not to 95% of the population. So you have that huge group. slave control was a lot more violent. It was a lot more unpredictable. Unlike the States, most of the Europeans who came to Jamaica didn't come to settle there. They came to make a quick buck and head back. So you have this set of everybody with an ulterior motive, everybody aiming for a quick buck, and so on, and all of it. So I think it's off. Are you still hearing me?
No.
Alright, once I can project. So with that, you have a very very volatile environment, and in that you have all these slaves. In Jamaica, there are always rebellions, there are always plots to burn down cities. They burned down Montego Bay once. There's always plots to burn down Kingston. So there's this really almost constantly volatile type of environment. And that's the kind of environment that Night Woman came out of. Since this is very informal, I'm just gonna like... I don't want to go on the receiving end of that. That's what I saw as I was saying. So I'm going to just throw it out to those of you who may have questions. I'm sure you have tons. And I'll just indicate you. Yes?
Hi, my name is Deborah. I'm in Professor Katrina Smith's class. I had a question. In the beginning when Miss Isabel, well, not Isabel, but Lilith was playing with her child that she no longer could have played with once the child realized that she was black and she was white. Mm-hmm. Was that child Miss Isabel, or was it not?
So I said in the beginning of the book when Lilith is playing with a white child until they stop thinking was that person Isabel or not. Kinda. I sort of wanted the impression to be left. I didn't set out to confirm it, but she was, because I think at one point, I'm trying to remember the book, I wrote it so long ago.
Because they said that she was sent back to school.
Colibra, yeah. So it was her, but I wanted it to establish that it was her, but also wanted to establish that by the time they're separated, it's such a faded memory for somebody like Isabel that it's almost as if it didn't happen. So I didn't want the reader to also get that sense of just how insignificant it was to say if you were the master, you were the owners. That was almost as if, you're playing with one of your many pets. Yeah, you're not going to remember all of them. Yeah.
And another question, was the woman that she kept seeing that appeared, was that from all spirit? Or?
I have no idea.
She just disappeared at one point. She didn't see her anymore.
Yeah, I have no idea. Usually I tell my writing students, everything that's in your head should come down on the page. And if there's anything in your head that's not down on the page, it needs to come down. So everything that was in my head came down. So if something is a mystery in a story, it should be a mystery to the writer as well. So I have no idea who she is. She just showed up one day. Again, when you're writing a book and you start to get really embroiled in a character, sometimes the book starts to write you. So a lot of the mysteries in that book is also a mystery to me. I just sort of jot them down. Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Chanel Cannell. My professor is Professor Backford. Did you find it disturbing to write about the cruelty of slaves and how in-depth you got with the punishments and all of that? Was that hard to write? Because it was hard to read, on my end, but...
She was asking if I found it hard to write about the cruelties and the atrocities and just the punishment and the brutality of that system. It was very difficult to write. Larners is certainly nowhere as difficult as actually going through it. And that's one of the things I had to tell myself. As much as I can claim, oh, this is too brutal, to write it or to read it, it doesn't compare to living through it. But that said, yes, it was. And especially some of the really, really violent parts. The first thing about a book like this, and those of you who've seen 12 Years a Slave or will see it, is that it's funny, watching 12 Years a Slave, I can tell the parts where the filmmaker pulled back. That slavery wasn't like that, slavery was worse. And even with all the brutality in Night Women, it was actually a lot worse than that. Some of the things like, you know, I could go into details what a derby dose is, but you really don't want to know. Although I think you figure it out from the book. It was very difficult because you're writing about people and you're writing about atrocities, and writing about atrocities will change you. It's like when I talk to writers who write about the Holocaust, or even people who've been through it, or their parents have been through it, that it is pretty hard to write. One of the things that I remember when I was in the middle of writing it, I just became sort of consumed with rage. And because if you're writing a book writing a book and living with these characters, you're gonna live through these things as well. So it was, and I think remembering that, you know, some of these stories you do need to tell them. And I think also, one of the problems when we talk about stories, any form of atrocity, could be this or it could be Rwanda, is that if you write about something brutal but sort of shirk up the responsibility or make it more acceptable, then people don't realize just what exactly happened. And I think sometimes when we read these things or we're watching shows or so on, that we think that putting it in a sort of a more acceptable thing makes it readable. But then it gives us a false view of what happened. That scenes of brutality should be brutal. Scenes of violence should be violent. Scenes of cruelty should be cruel. But then scenes of love should be loving too. Scenes of affection should be affectionate. I think that one of the things to remember about living in the world of the Night Women is for them, that was still their life. So yeah, certain parts of the book are funny. Sometimes these women actually find time to make joke at each other's expense. So there is that, but yeah, it was very hard to write, and it will, if you're writing about any form of atrocity, where you're writing about, the Armenian genocide or Rwanda or so on, it should be brutal because it was a pretty brutal thing, and we have a way in this world of sometimes forgetting that, which is why I think these stories should be continued to be told. There's no there's no atrocity timetable. It's not like, okay, we've had enough World War II stories, enough. We've had enough Holocaust stories, let's cap it off. We need to be constantly reminded of that, because it's not the first time we've done it, and we may do it again. Next. Yes. He's coming with the mic.
Oh, we have a mic now. Thank you. My name is Tasha, and I'm one of Professor Vasquez's students. You said the story is about Lilith. It actually started out as a different story when you went into Lilith. But the narrator at the end is Lovey Quinn, which you don't find out till the end. Was that something you planned from the beginning once this became Lilith's story, or was it something you incorporated to show how everything can be taken away from a slave, even their own story? How did you come about making her the narrator when it was supposed to be Lilith's story?
That's a very good question. Honestly, this would come as a surprise. Well, it comes as a surprise to some people. It was a big surprise to me. I really didn't know who was telling the story till the very end. Even people who were reading it as I was writing it, I was like, but I have no idea who's telling this story. I really didn't. It really didn't come until near the end of writing it. It hit me that it would have been her. And it's funny, you sometimes trust your subconscious to be a better writer than you are, and that I don't know what's going on, but somewhere in my head somebody's figuring it out. And part of it too is that the original version of the story, the one that I showed, was actually about her daughter. But it was a totally different story. It wasn't told in her voice. It was written in third person. It was written in nice as a Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice voice. And But I think near the end of it, when it started to be more about the telling of her story, I knew it wasn't Lilith who was telling the story, because up to the end, I don't think there are certain things. There are a lot of things Lilith can deal with, but I don't think she can deal totally with you know, the really highs and really lows and the light and darkness of her life. So it would have to be somebody else. But it also would have to be somebody else who could get other sources. Because her daughter has other sources other than Lilith to tell the story. And I also thought it was kind of a story that, to me, just made sense. That it's a kind of story that daughters would talk about their mothers. Like, it couldn't be a son. I don't know why this didn't make sense to me. Because the narrator is also trying to figure it out. There are parts in the book where the narrator is speaking for herself. You know, this line that she says every now and then, that every Negro walk in a circle. That's her opinion, that's not Lilith's. And there are times when the book even judges Lilith's actions, or refuses to judge, stays out of the way. So yeah, it really just evolved, and it was for a long time. Writing it was a lot like your experience reading it. I had no idea who was talking until the very end. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rania. I'm Professor Vasquez's class. My question is, because you took so much risk with the language, did you have a problem publishing it? With publishing companies, did they give you a hard time?
I did. Funny, I never had a problem with American publishers with dialect, because it's not the first novel or the first story I've written in dialect. And even the novel that I have coming out in fall is almost pretty much half dialect, half patois. It's funny, I had a bigger problem in the UK. The British publisher didn't like it. The first British publisher, it's funny, Penguin subsidiary published it, Penguin in the US, and a Penguin subsidiary in the UK turned it down. So it was the same publishing house and different people accepting and rejecting it. And so it went to Viking in UK, which is a Penguin subsidiary, and they asked if I'd consider rewriting the whole thing in standard English, because they didn't think it would sell in the UK and the rest of the world. And British people like to say that, UK and the rest of the world. Like, can you just say half that sentence? Everything, well, you know, in the UK and the rest of the world. Like, you no longer own the rest of the world. It's like, colonial days are done. It's really funny because they turned it down, and the book that they thought wouldn't sell sold 35,000 copies in the UK. So I'm not sure who those imaginary people are who bought the book. But yeah, there was a resistance. There was more of a resistance in Britain. In America, I had no problems. I think for lots of reasons. One, the novel told totally in dialect is more. There's a bigger tradition of it here. There's everything from Huckleberry Finn to Color Purple. You know, Color Purple won the Pulitzer. And even novels from other countries, like True History of the Kelly Gang and so on, that there is more of an idea that a person's natural voice can tell literature. A person's natural voice can be a part of art here than in the UK. So yeah, it was funny enough, another publisher in the UK took the book. So it's weird. Penguin publishes it here, a different publisher publishes it there. She's had nothing but success with it. But there's still this idea that patois is not a legit thing. It's something that you say if you talk in natural speech, but it shouldn't be in literature. In Jamaica, I run into problems with it. People are like, aren't you an English teacher? Why are you writing a book in patois?
Patois is English.
Huh?
Patois is English. It's just broken in English.
Yeah. So there was a resistance. With the American publishers, the view was, it takes a little bit, maybe 15, 20 pages to get the hang of it, but once you get there, it's pretty much, you can pretty much sail through it. There are lots of things that they agreed not to do, like we wouldn't have a glossary. One of the problems with glossaries is that glossaries reinforce the idea that this is different. instead of having people just start to accept the rhythm of it. Languages are, contrary to what people think, languages, and even though this is not necessarily a language, languages really aren't that hard to learn. They're really not. One of the things that you do is to start to embody it and live it with a character or the people with it. That's why sometimes you have a better chance learning German if you just go to Germany and sit down and hang out than if you take a course. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take German, take it. But you get what I'm saying, that sometimes the whole idea of the book still is to live with with the characters. And I think that makes it easier. But yeah, some publishers have a problem. Yeah. Oh, get to this. It's back.
Hi, sir. My name is Stephon White.
Hi.
From Professor Martin's class. I had a question. Did you name the book before, during, or after you wrote the book?
After. Way after. Usually I'm really good with naming books and naming stories. This one, as I said, nothing about writing this book happened the way in which books normally happen. I didn't have an idea and plot it out and stick to it and write to the end. Nothing in this book was planned. And so the name didn't come until probably even 5-6 drafts. It had all sorts of ideas for names. One idea was brown sugar. That's a terrible idea. I didn't care one. I went through a whole bunch of names. So I was going to call it Lilith at one point, and that just didn't strike me as a sexy enough name. The Book of Night Woman it just happened. It happened one day. I think I was talking to a friend of mine who was actually in music, and I think he said Ballad of the Night Woman, and I was like, yeah, that's too pretentious. Let's call it the Book of the Night Woman or something, and that kind of stuck. A lot of things, and again, I'm a big believer in this sort of trusting your subconscious. Somebody came to me and I was like, Lilith, that's a great choice. And I was like, okay, I was just fishing for a name. And I was like, well, I said, did you know when you named her? I was like, did I know why? It says what Lilith means. I'm like, yeah, Lilith is the rejected wife of Adam. I said, no, Lilith means woman who runs with darkness. It's like, whoa. I had no idea. It just kind of happened. It's just like, they thought I picked it because it's called the Book of Night Woman. So clearly, Lilith was, the name literally means night woman in a way. And no, it just kind of happened. It's one of these sort of weird things that happens when you write books. I think it happens whenever you make art. That some of it is deliberate, some of it is, but a lot of it is just really happy accidents. It's funny, I was watching, I don't know where it was, somebody was talking to Prince about a song he has in Forever in Your Life, and he was like, and your idea of having the background vocals come before the vocals, that was genius. He was like, actually the power went out and I didn't track it correctly. But I'll take the compliment. So some of that, yeah, so Lilith was a coincidence, Night Woman happened, but it did happen after. Way after I finished writing it. Somebody had a question? Yeah. Oh, he's coming.
Well, my question, I think, is pretty obvious since you're pretty in-depth with your explanation. And since you mentioned that you wrote other books in patois, I just wanted to know what drove you to write your books that way. Did you have a certain reason or inspiration when you started writing your books? Or, yeah, because in the beginning I wanted to ask you about your book, the Book of Night Women in particular, but since you mentioned your other books, I wanted to know. By the way, my name is Natalie and I'm in Mr. Bishop's class.
Hi. Well, I mean, I can talk about Night Woman because it did start out as a book written in standard English, whatever you want to call that. This one, the first novel I wrote did start out that way. It was hybrid, it's half standard English, half patois. And the patois served a very specific purpose in that book. That the patois in that book is sort of like this Greek chorus. it's a group of people, they never tell who they are. A lot of times they contradict what the narrator just said. A lot of things they say in verse. So it was almost like this sort of Greek chorus going through the book. With this one, it became, dialogue was different. I knew that if I was gonna give the book over to a certain character to tell it, then it had to be in dialect. It had to be in patois. It had to be in that person's voice, or it just wouldn't be true to it. Because I tried writing it the other way, and I only got to page 45. That said, it wasn't necessarily an easy thing. In fact, it was probably my first fight with this character, and I fought with her, as I said, for the entire book. That because the whole idea, I had to get past my own sort of inferiority complex about patois. That to get to the point where I could think, well, I could tell a book worse, a book that's over 400 pages in dialect. One of the things that even now, I'll go to a reading sometimes with Jamaicans and I hear the patois and think, oh, this is going to be slapstick comedy. Because we're fine with that, and if patois is used as something to laugh at. And one of the things that reggae music did that is really, really important is that reggae was the first time people used dialect to talk about serious issues. They really did pave the way. We love, writers would love to take credit for it, but we really can't. It really is the reggae musicians, Bob Marlon, Peter Tosh, whoever. They're the first to start using how they naturally spoke to talk about really, really important things. So part of that is sort of taking the lead from musicians and going further with it. But it was, I had to get over my own prejudices about it. The whole idea that, one, you can use this to tell a story, but also use it to tell seriously, whatever that means. And that was kind of a learning thing. So even now, the novel I just finished writing, a good part, a huge part of it is in that, but it's different. It's more 1970s. But the thing is, if you're going to write about people, sometimes you have to choose, are they going to talk the way they should talk, or the way they talk, or are you going to put your voice in their mouths? Sometimes there's a difference in those two things. Yeah, at the back.
Hi, my name is Chase Carlisle. Professor Vincent is my professor. My question is, in the book, it seems to revolve a lot around regret, that everyone kind of walks a circle, and we see regret in Lilith's life, in Homer, and even Quinns like Humphrey and Isabel. I was curious if that was really something you would plan as a big part of the story, or just something that's kind of interweaved within the characters.
Interesting question. I don't think it was planned. I think the one thing I'd say in response to it being maybe planned is that I think the book is a remembrance. So, and with remembrance, there would come a sort of regret. There would come considering of actions. Part of the whole point of the story is Lilith telling her daughter parts of it, almost as a way of sort of not necessarily excusing herself, but explaining herself. So I think there is that. There is. I also wanted to touch on things deeper than just, cruel massa victim slaves. That it was a lot more messy than that. It was a lot more brutal than that. That some of the biggest causes of brutality on the estate were other slaves. That when we're talking about real atrocity, that the crimes of it go beyond that to a point where even people who are being brutalized start to brutalize. There are two things. There's this great novel from an American author called The Known World. The book's called The Known World by Edward P. Jones. And The Known World is a pretty interesting book. It's about American slaves who owned slaves. So a lot of people didn't think it happened, but it did. And there's also, when we talk about the Shoah, when we're talking about the Holocaust, and when we're bringing people like Hannah Arendt, who talk about the Jews who helped in the Holocaust and were doing this and so on, and what real evil is. that real evil starts to warp even the good. That even the thing that's really atrocious is when they start to get slaves to do atrocious things, when people start to get so warped in this whole system of evil that, yeah, that eventually pretty much everybody has something to regret. You know, something that they would rather people not know. There are lots of slaves who would wish to have a daughter like Lilith's daughter, just to, you know, remind people that these were humans, these were people. I think that's my best answer.
We're going to take one more question, after which we're going to invite Professor James to go first in line to get something to eat. And then after that, then you guys can just go ahead and get in line and grab some food. So we have one more question.
Here's a pre-food question. Pre-food, PRE. Better be good. Otherwise, you can always just come up to me and ask after.
I am Fred.
Yeah.
You talk about opiate as in the book. Like at the end, you talk about like Cersei is making the opiate and Lilith. You talk about the book. Like how you use opiate in the book.
How I use it?
Yeah.
Well, opiate, I mean, opiate is certainly one of the African religions that came over that actually still being practiced in Jamaica, although we don't like to talk about it. But usually in Jamaica, if we say we're going to St. Thomas, we know it. We say, yeah, certain things happen in St. Thomas. Yeah, we know you're going to our opiate, man. But they still believe in it. And the terms like black magic and white magic don't really apply to African religions. That said, Obia was set against something called Nile. And there's a part in it where Homer says she doesn't practice Obia, she's Nile, not Obia. That they were sort of diametrically opposed. A lot of Obia, people consider it sorcery, but a lot of it is really potions. You know, potions and oils and so on. And it's definitely something that's practiced in secret. And it still is, as I said. Part of it is a preservation of African culture. It's like, you know, voodoo in Haiti, although Obia and voodoo really have nothing in common. Obia really is something sort of secretive. It is often used for bad purposes. As I say, it's not. Voodoo is an actual religion. Obia can be something that's used, you know, as a curse. Even in Jamaica recently, actually it wasn't recently, it was like a few years ago, a friend of mine fired an employee. And the next day he's coming to work and he's climbing up the stairs and there's this big soiled white brief under the staircase. And it's like he just thought some dogs carried it there or something. When the other employees showed up, it was a pandemonium. They started screaming and crying. I was like, oh my God, them Obia, yo. Did you go up the staircase? He's like, yeah, I went up the staircase. And I'm like, oh my God, we have to put hands on you, them Obia, yo. And so on. The thing about Obia is, like a lot of witchcraft, it really depends on if you believe it or not. If you believe it, it can be a horrible thing or a great thing. If you don't, then it really doesn't matter either way. So I think, you know, so it's still there, and it still depends on belief. And it still is something that it can be a sort of secret knowledge. And it's not just a black thing, as I said, Isabel knew about it. And there are lots of, if you're in Jamaica, Obia man's place is called a barnyard. And depending on when you go, if you go to a barnyard, you'll see all sorts of Lexuses and Mercedes Benzes and all that outside. It's not just somebody straight up for an oil, it's rich people, it's politicians, it's you know, people in power. Maybe they don't believe it, but they just want one extra thing. So it's still sort of done, and it's still not talked about, but it's there. All right, guys, thanks for having me on the road.